Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you are new to the show, please hit that subscribe button. Also consider becoming a YouTube member, a Patreon, or donate small amount given in the link in the description box. Without further ado, let me welcome our guest tonight, Larry Johnson. Larry is an American political commentator and former analyst at the CIA. Larry, you welcome back to India and Global Left.
Yeah, thank you, Jodish.
So the meeting between the American and Iranian delegates have been cancelled
Correct.
because Israel has been sabotaging by massacring more people in Lebanon. Um, what is going on between Israel and the United States?
Well, potentially a realignment of the relationship. Donald Trump and J.D. Vance over the last 48 hours have had some pretty tough words for Israel. But Israel, in its arrogance, continues to insist that it can do whatever it wants, and the United States has to go along with it. And that's why they deliberately stepped up these attacks in Lebanon, virtually daring Iran to, do anything to retaliate. And I think Iran is going to retaliate. I think right now Iran is in consultation with Pakistan and with the Saudis and with China, wanting to make sure that Iran is not perceived as the one who breaks this. It violates the memorandum of understanding that was signed on Wednesday with Donald Trump. And he signed in Versailles, the Palace of Versailles, and President Pezeshkian signed from Tehran. So this, Israel was just, they basically vowed they'd do everything in their power to destroy it. And the reality is this MOU would not have come about had it not been for the actions of Bibi Netanyahu in southern Lebanon, when they bombed Dahia the other day, again in a direct confrontation with Iran. The Iranians were getting ready to strike back. They were going to retaliate, and it was Donald Trump who intervened, and said, no, no, please don't, and made all the concessions that Iran had demanded. So we'll say, I don't know if, Trump already today has been saying some things that would suggest he's not serious about maintaining this, let's call it, relationship with Iran.
Yeah, he says
So
Iran is finished. We are not going to give them money, not 10 cents.
right, yeah. So he's pandering again, and so. But again, he's also doing that to try to neutralize the domestic critics. But he's going to get destroyed by the economic wave that's going to hit the United States in about 3 or 4 weeks. And once the strategic petroleum reserve is depleted, and the impact of the oil shortage hits, then Trump's options politically, economically, militarily will be significantly reduced.
What is your sense of the sentiment about Israel within the White House officials? Because a lot of people in Israel, including analysts, the Haaretz, are saying that from now on, Israel would be treated as an obstacle by the United States. Do you think there are more and more people now who'd be opposed to Israel, or do you think the coalition that people like Lindsey Graham, Ted Cruz, and others represent are still very, very strong to nullify any of this shift?
Okay, you need to separate out specifically what you're talking about. So if we're talking about the political class that dominates Washington, D.C., then the answer there is that political class is still bought and paid for by Israel, and they are not uh, you know, changing. They're not willing to walk away from Israel at this point. Uh, there are still a few people in the Trump administration that are not ardent Zionists, but very few. Um, there are quite people have questions about J.D. Vance. Some are very skeptical. They think he may be a closet Zionist, but he has been at least reported to have spoken out about the need to have a deal with Iran and to stop this war and not be um, so held captive by Israel. Is number one. Um, when you go outside of Washington, D.C., or let's stay within the establishment media as well is still largely pro-Israel and will slant the news in such a way that opposition voices don't ever get a chance to be heard, to have an open discussion about it. It's only when you get outside of Washington, D.C., and to the broader American public that you're beginning to see that, particularly in the people under the age of 50, growing disenchantment with Israel. Support for Palestine is the Palestinians are growing, and so uh, it's fractured candidly, and this is a clear example where the Washington politicians are completely out of touch with the sentiments of the people.
Yeah, I asked the question because I think it was the genocide in Palestine that had shifted the ground for the larger American public in terms of their opinion about Palestine and Israel. But there are some who are saying that the war with Iran and the kind of strategic defeat that Iran has handed to the United States, and the fact that Israel is making it more and more difficult for the US to come out of it, has meant that not just within the population, but even within the ruling elites, the ground must have shifted. And they cite the sort of recent statements from J.D. Vance and Donald Trump himself as evidence of that.
Well, yeah, Vance's comments I take seriously. Trump's I don't, simply because, as we noted earlier, he's already saying the opposite. He's insisting that Iran didn't meet. I guess I just saw his Truth Social from 4 hours ago. We didn't meet out of desperation. Iran did. They are finished. We'll play out the 60 days. They get no money, not 10 cents. Well, that's not what the MOU says. So, uh, and it wasn't Iran who was seeking for the meeting, seeking for the negotiations all along. And this has been a repeated pattern that the United States seeks negotiations, they get negotiations, and then at some point they bail out and they betray the Iranian side. So a little bit like the old Charlie Brown cartoon, where Charlie Brown would want to kick the football, and Lucy would say, "Yeah, here, come kick it," and then he'd pull the football. She would pull the football away, and he'd miss and land on his backside. Uh, Iran has been acting a little bit like Charlie Brown, naive and trusting, too trusting at times, and have discovered, the very painfully, that the United States is not to be trusted. The United States, its word means nothing. Unfortunately, I hate to say that about my country, but it's true.
I wanted to ask about your thoughts on the broader implication of this war, because in so many ways this was a historic war, and by the word historic, I'm not romanticizing it, because thousands of lives have been lost. So we need to keep that in mind. 3,000 in the Iranian side, maybe 4,000 or more in Lebanon.
Sure.
But historic in the sense that it has exposed. In a way, not many people would have imagined the vulnerabilities of the U.S. empire. It has
Yeah.
also exposed to the allies, U.S. allies in the region about the liabilities of hosting U.S. bases, something that has been hitherto treated as an asset or as a very successful deal. If you look at the last few decades or so, um, what what are the implications of this massive strategic defeat of the U.S. At the hands of uh, I'm not sure Robert Pepe has defined now Iran as one of the few 4 or 5 great powers, but uh, I reserve that comment because it's still 24th or 25th in terms of global economy. I mean, in terms of GDP, Iran is a quite uh, not among the top. So, what is the significance of this defeat?
Well, to quote an old Beatles song, they sang, money can't buy me love. Well, money can't buy you military power either. And that's been the real lesson for the that the United States still has not learned. It still is on this path that if we just spend another $1.5 trillion, we can have the best, strongest military in the world. Yet, what the events, and it's not just this recent attack on Iran, we'll call it the 40-day war, what lasted from 28 September to roughly 15 April, that 45, let's see, what are we looking at? 31, 40, 15, 46, 47-day war. It exposed that the United States has very expensive weaponry that doesn't work as promised, particularly with the Patriot missiles, the PAC-3 missiles, failed to stop Iranian ballistic missiles. That's number one. That the billions, tens of billions of dollars spent on the U.S. Navy with the aircraft carriers, and their security is provided by, three to five destroyers that sell on that they can't get anywhere close to shore to do their job because of the fear of hypersonic missiles that, in this case, Iran has. And as well, before Iran, we saw the Houthis basically fought the U.S. Navy to a standstill, or at least forced the U.S. Navy to finally say, "Okay, we've won, we're going home," which was they hadn't won, but it was another example of the hubris on the side of the Americans. And then ground forces, the expeditionary, the age in which you could load troops up on planes or ships and move them from point A to point B, it's become more dangerous, more potentially lethal. Now, again, because of the advances in missile technology and drones, the you know we look back on the 19th century, when in the middle of the 19th century, the convention was that armies would line up and they'd be massed formations, and this was because the rifles that they were using to fire, you could only get like one shot off every minute, maybe, if you could reload that quick. So they would mass them together so you could mass fire. Well, as machine guns came into existence and artillery became more proficient, that was no longer, they had to get away from those mass formations. Now with drones, we've seen that you can't even get 20 guys together in one area without the threat of them being attacked. So what this has exposed is that Iran, fighting a defensive war, was able to defeat the three normal vectors of attack that the United States has: air, maritime, and ground. So that's where, the truth it is showing that the ability of an imperial power to project force and control, take over another country is very limited. We did it in Venezuela, but that was a betrayal of Maduro by his own security forces. But the United States couldn't replicate that in Iran at all.
At one level, this is a new age. What you were saying is
Hmm.
due to the diffusion of technologies, drones and missiles in particular, an offensive war mounted even by relatively stronger power would be very, very costly. Um, do you also think there was something particular to the US military industrial complex itself and its stupidity? Like, of course, there are lots of reports and talks about the corruption within the US military and how bloated it is and how much of money is funneled by the five defense contractors and kind of technology that they sell in the market are not actually battle ready. And I mean, there are all these things that we hear of, but would you what are your thoughts about something specific within the U.S. Military that this war might have make them rethink if they don't
Well,
have the hubris?
yeah, well, let's start with what this war has exposed. So it is further exposed that there are physical limits on the weapons that the United States has, that on the modern battlefield, weapons that when they were designed were envisioned would be used on occasion, but suddenly are now having to be used in mass on a daily basis. For example, the Patriot 3, the PAC-3 missile for the Patriot missile battery. And so now what's happened is, um, because of the volume of drones and missiles that were expended, for example, by the Russians against the Ukrainians, that the United States sent some Patriot missile batteries, and they carried a total of about 1,000, less than 1,000 uh, Patriot PAC-3 missiles. So every time the Russians fired, like say an Iskander or a Kinshal or even a Garan drone, the Patriot would be, in theory, would fire two PAC-3 missiles. Well, each PAC-3 missile costs between $4 million and $6 million, and a Garan drone, my understanding, costs maybe around $50,000. So right off the bat, you're spending anywhere between uh, $8 and $12 million to take out a $50,000 threat. That is not an economically sustainable path forward. And then after you fire those PAC-3s, you need to build more, but then you discover that the supply chain is completely dependent upon Chinese controlled rare earth minerals, which means no matter how many you want to build, you simply do not have the material with which to build it. Um, so you've got that hanging over the entire process. So what you're really looking at is a complete disconnect between strategy and weapon systems. Uh, there was never any incentive to make something as cost effective as possible. There was always a bureaucratic incentive, for a corporate incentive to, you want to get the U.S. government committed to building a weapon system that has a big margin and that they think that they'll need it, but it's going to generate a lot of cash flow for your business. So again, the divorce of the weapon systems from what's needed on the battlefield to what's needed to put money into corporations for their shareholders.
Um, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about the future of U.S.-Iran relationship because, and of course, like one way to think about it is, oh, it was just Israel and it was the Israeli lobby, and it really depends on whether the U.S. administration is able to push back the Israeli lobby. If they do so, then it's a cakewalk, because effectively, like, it's then persuading Iran to
Hmm.
dilute their enriched uranium, and in exchange of that, you just release the frozen assets and integrate Iran into the global economy, pushing down oil prices and bringing in back investments. And so it's a very happy story one can tell if the Israeli lobby can be controlled. Now, whether it can be or not is one set of questions, and that's why we began with the relationship between Israel and the United States. The other way of looking at it is that the U.S. empire has a long-term strategic goal in the region, and all these bases and assets and presence in West Asia, they're not going to them back like that easily, even if UAE and mostly Saudi Arabia and others would be rethinking about the viability of these bases, or all the security packs that they have had in the last few decades or so. But that's going to be a very slow winding process, and in the meantime, the relationship between the US and Iran would be very, very complicated and tumultuous. Like, what is your thoughts on the future of US Iran relationship?
So, what we've got to overcome is this massive propaganda that has infected the minds of the American public, that it has just a visceral hatred of Iran, because Iran is portrayed as the number one sponsor of terrorism. It is not, but that is how it is repeatedly presented to the American people, that Iran has been murdering and killing American soldiers. Again, not true. Um, so, and one of the real ironies I see in my society, we like to talk about Judeo-Christian values as if there are values that Jews and Christians share in common. Yet, when you go and to compare Islam to Judaism, within Islam, Jesus, who Christians see as the Son of God, the Muslims view Jesus as a prophet, as someone holy and to be respected. Uh, Jews do not. They think Jesus was just some sort of, it ranges from a zealot, a revolutionary, a malcontent, but certainly not a Messiah, not a prophet. And the same with respect to views about Mary, the mother of Jesus. She is described in the Talmud in very, very disgusting terms as a whore. Uh, and yet, within Islam, Mary is venerated. In fact, in Tehran, I'm told just there's an Armenian church, and there's a subway station near that Armenian church that is dedicated to Mary, the mother of Jesus. So what I'm suggesting here is that they're actually from if we're looking at strictly in religious terms, there's much more that Muslims and Christians have in common than Christians and Jews have in common. And yet the Jewish perspective, the Zionist perspective, I should call it, has been dominant in the United States. And so that's uh, getting rid of that is I think something that must happen before you can have a good relationship with Iran. The other thing, though, the United States is confronting is it is the foundations of U.S. imperial power are eroding and being destroyed. The petrodollar is still important, but has been rapidly declining in importance, particularly as BRICS, with China and Russia in the lead, are creating an alternative financial system. And the United States actions have actually helped accelerate this, that are by imposing sanctions, economic sanctions on others, seizing assets of other countries, have caused those countries to say, we can no longer afford to be vulnerable to that kind of threat, to that kind of bullying. And so they are looking for alternatives. And in looking for alternatives, they um, come up with a new financial order that China and Russia are creating, and Iran is going to be a part of that.
Donald Trump recognizes this, as in one of his press interviews, he was pushed about the US paying Iran, and he said that we are not paying, we are um, returning the money they
Right.
had that we had stolen because at some point in time, if we don't do it, then nobody's going to trust our dollar.
Well, right. It is. So there's an estimated between with interest between 60 and 100 $100 million. Is it 100 million? Yeah, $100 million that the United States confiscated from Iran when the Iranian Republic came into being, the money that Iran had been paying for weapon systems. As far as the 300, uh, was it 300 billion?
300 billion.
Yeah, billion. Um, okay, I don't think it's one. I don't think it's $100 billion that was seized, but maybe it was. But the 300 billion though is more of a is damages that Iran has identified, and then the United States promising to help put together other an international donor class that would finance that. Now, I just, the that's not probably very realistic, given that Trump already had created a similar fund for the Board of Peace for Gaza, and as of today's, to my knowledge, it doesn't have any money dedicated to it. So,
Right. I'm curious your thoughts about the implication of this, of all this on the U.S. empire in East Asia, and it seems like a random question, but I'm trying to link the tariff wars. I mean, if you look at the sequence, the war on Iran came after the massive tariff war that was directed towards China,
mhm.
and if you were someone sitting at China within the party, I mean, you must be looking at this, and I mean, you would be rejoicing for several factors of reasons. I mean, I just read in today's Bloomberg that BYD sales in East Asia and Southeast Asia are bustling since the rise up the petroleum prices.
What kind of sale? What kind of
The
sales?
BYD auto sales.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and also in Vietnam and elsewhere.
So
Like,
you mean China's electric vehicle?
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So they are of course like happy for various reasons, but they would also be laughing at the kind of threat that the U.S. administration had been posing about Taiwan, and also in Japan, in South Korea, in Philippines. We know about all these bases. The U.S. has made a lot of noise about it, about controlling China, and so on and so forth. Um, what do you think would be the larger impact of what the debacle that had happened in West Asia on the future of East Asia itself?
Yeah. Well, again, the the underlying theory of having U.S. bases in your country is it would provide you protection and provide you stability. And now, what has been demonstrated over the course of the last 4 months in the Persian Gulf is that those bases are an enormous liability. They do not provide the country protection, and in fact, they've been very costly by making those countries into a target. So I think you're already seeing signs that Qatar and Saudi Arabia are going to be eliminating U.S. bases and cutting back, really restricting U.S. presence in their countries. I know that one of the endeavors that China is pursuing via Pakistan is the creation of a new regional security architecture that will that security would be guaranteed through the joint cooperation of the militaries of Egypt, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Pakistan. And, it would be a Muslim, if you will, a Muslim force that would be available to help defend all of the Islamic countries that were under its umbrella. So that's an interesting development because the United States had at least 12 or 20 different bases that were targets of attack by Iran, and most of those have been abandoned. The U.S. personnel that were there before are no longer there because it's too dangerous, or now they can't return because too much has been destroyed. So in a way, this war has already started forced the United States to start abandoning its foreign bases in the area. So we see the potential for that trend to continue as well in the East Asia.
Some people said after Venezuela that Cuba is just a matter of time. Do you think this debacle again in Iran would have any implication on Cuba in terms of putting a brake on the misadventure that Marco Rubio and his Miami Cuba Hawks
Yeah,
were cooking up?
yeah, no, I think it has because they have to sit down and calculate if we're going to take over Cuba. Then at that point, there is no readily identified person standing in the wings that has a political support among the people of Cuba. When they overthrew the Shah of Iran, there was the Ayatollah Khomeini was a viable political figure leader who had popular support. Um, so that's the first big obstacle the United States faces is it could get rid of the current leadership, but then who controls the country? And the country is predisposed towards guerrilla warfare uh, with the weapons and the mountains that the United States would be we'd have to put in a lot of troops that we don't have, and it would become a very costly endeavor. So I think it's on hold for now.
And finally, what would be the implication of this war on the U.S. domestic politics? The midterms are coming. What is your sense of what is the impact of this war on U.S. domestic politics?
Um, well, right now the prediction is it's going to devastate Republican control of the House and Senate. It may do that. The reason I'm now less certain of that is so many of the Democrats are coming out and blasting Trump for making a deal with Iran. They're as bloodthirsty and a group of warmongers as Trump is. So at that point you say, why support one over the other when they're both symptoms of the same disease?
Absolutely. It's just so frustrating to see Trump having to justify a deal to the liberal press
Yeah.
and the Democrats because they've been attacking him for making too many concessions to Iran. Like, for God's sake.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous.
We'll keep it short, Larry. This was insightful as always, and thank you so much for joining.
Well, I thank you for the invitation, and I hope that things go well for you with all the other issues you're dealing with, and that you can be at peace.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.